The blistering Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Valerie Lockhart stumbled along the dusty road leading away from Florence, her once fine blue dress torn and filthy, her chestnut hair falling in tangled strands around her pale face. Sweat trickled down her neck as she clutched a small cloth bundle, all that remained of her former life. The year was 1883, and she had just been cast from the only home she'd known for the past 5 years with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few meager possessions she'd managed to grab before her late husband's brother had thrown her onto the street. Her legs trembled beneath her, weakened from 2 days without proper food and little water. The distant mountains wavered in the heat as Valerie sank to her knees in the dirt, her throat parched and her stomach hollow with hunger. She'd been walking since dawn, fleeing Florence and the humiliation she'd suffered there, but the unforgiving desert offered no sanctuary. "This is how I die," she whispered, her voice cracking. At 25, she had already weathered more hardship than most women twice her age, orphaned at 16. Married at 20 to a man 30 years her senior who had promised security but delivered only isolation. And now widowed and destitute after Edward's sudden death, revealed he'd left everything to his brother Thomas. The distant sound of hoofbeats barely registered through her exhaustion. Valerie raised her head, squinting against the harsh sunlight as a rider approached. She struggled to her feet, knowing how vulnerable a lone woman was in these territories, but her legs buckled beneath her again. The rider slowed his horse, and through her blurred vision, Valerie made out the silhouette of a man atop a chestnut stallion. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, dusty work clothes, and worn leather boots with spurs that caught the sunlight. "Madam." His voice carried across the distance between them. "You all right there?" Valerie attempted to stand again, pride demanding she not be found sprawled in the dirt like some vagrant. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice betraying her with its weakness. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing a tall frame and broad shoulders. As he approached, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with a face weathered by sun and wind, piercing blue eyes, and several days' worth of stubble along his jaw. "You don't look fine," he said plainly, crouching down beside her. "Name's Lucas Calloway. I run the Double C Ranch about 10 miles east of here." "Valerie Lockhart," she replied, her southern upbringing automatically prompting the proper introduction despite her circumstances. "Mrs. Lockhart, you're a long way from anywhere. What brings you out here alone?" His eyes were kind but cautious, taking in her disheveled appearance and the small bundle clutched in her hand. "I'm no longer Mrs. Anyone," Valerie said, a bitter edge to her words. "My husband died 3 weeks ago and his brother saw fit to claim everything, including the house. I was asked to leave rather forcefully." Lucas's jaw tightened. "In Florence, let me guess, Thomas Lockhart?" Valerie nodded, surprised. "That man's got a reputation that stretches all the way to Tucson," Lucas said, reaching for his canteen. "Here, drink this, slowly now." The water was warm but felt like heaven on her parched throat. Valerie took small sips as Lucas had instructed, fighting the urge to gulp it down. "You can't stay out here," he said, looking around at the barren landscape. "Next town's too far for you to reach on foot, especially in this heat." "I don't have much choice," Valerie replied, handing back the canteen. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "My ranch isn't much, but there's a spare room in the main house. My sister Sarah lives there too. She's visiting friends in Tucson right now, but she'll be back in a few days." "You can stay until you figure out your next step," Valerie stiffened. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Calloway." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "Sarah could use help around the house, and I need someone to help with the accounts. My eyes aren't what they used to be for small numbers, and I'd wager a woman with your background knows her way around a ledger book." It was true managing Edward's household accounts had been one of her few responsibilities during their marriage. Still, Valerie hesitated. "You don't know me, Mr. Calloway. I could be anyone." A slight smile crossed his weathered face. "Madam, out here we judge folks by what they do, not what they say. You seem like someone who's had a run of bad luck, not bad character." He stood and offered his hand. At the Double C, you'll have everything you need. Something about the simple sincerity in his voice broke through the wall of pride Valerie had erected. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas nodded, then led her to his horse. "You ever ride before, Mrs. Lockhart?" "Valerie," she corrected. "And yes, though it's been some time." "Well, Valerie," he said, helping her into the saddle, "hold on tight. Rusty here's gentle, but the terrain's rough." Lucas mounted behind her, reaching around to take the reins. Valerie stiffened at the unfamiliar intimacy of their position, but as they began moving, exhaustion overcame her discomfort, and she found herself leaning back against his solid warmth. The journey to the Double C took nearly 2 hours. As they crested a small rise, Valerie saw the ranch spread out below them, a modest main house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and a small bunkhouse. It wasn't the grand estate Edward had owned, but there was something immediately welcoming about its unpretentious solidity. "It's not much," Lucas said, echoing her thoughts, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Valerie replied honestly. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, older, with graying hair and a limp. He watched curiously as Lucas helped Valerie down from the horse. "Ellis, this is Mrs. Valerie Lockhart. She'll be staying with us for a while, helping Sarah with the house and me with the books." Ellis nodded respectfully. "Madam, good to meet you. Mrs. Lockhart's had a long journey," Lucas continued. "I'm going to show her to the guest room so she can rest." Valerie followed Lucas into the house, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance in the tidy, if simple, home. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a large oak table at the other. Bookshelves lined one wall, a sight that instantly made Valerie feel more at ease. Lucas showed her to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. "Bathrooms down the hall, we've got running water, which is something of a luxury out here. Sarah's room is across the way. Kitchen's through there," he gestured. "Make yourself at home, there's food in the pantry if you're hungry." "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Lucas," he corrected. "We don't stand on formality much here." "Lucas," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." He shook his head. "Get some rest. We can talk about everything else tomorrow." After he left, Valerie sank onto the bed, overcome by the day's events. She had begun the morning with nothing and nowhere to go. Now she had shelter, the promise of work, and the first genuine kindness she'd experienced since Edward's death. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears splashed onto her hands. Not tears of despair this time, but of relief, and perhaps, though she scarcely dared admit it, a flicker of hope. The following morning, Valerie awoke disoriented before remembering where she was. Sunlight streamed through the simple curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in weeks, she had slept deeply, without nightmares. On a chair near the bed, she found clean clothes, a simple cotton dress, undergarments, and a pair of sturdy boots that looked well worn but were in good condition. A note in a neat hand read, "These were Sarah's. She won't mind." L. The dress was a bit loose in the waist and short at the ankles. Sarah was evidently taller and more slender, but after weeks in her increasingly dirty traveling clothes, the fresh garments felt like luxury. The house was quiet as Valerie made her way to the kitchen, where she found coffee already brewed and a plate of biscuits covered with a cloth. Another note. "Had to check the north pasture, back by noon, help yourself." L. Valerie poured herself coffee and took a biscuit, savoring the simple food. After eating, she explored the house, noting its practical but comfortable furnishings. In what appeared to be Lucas's office, she found ledger books and correspondence neatly stacked on a desk by the window. Without conscious decision, Valerie sat down and opened the current ledger. The entries were precise but clearly done in haste, with occasional errors in calculation. She found a pencil and began making notations, careful not to change any of Lucas's original entries. She became so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear the front door open or Lucas's footsteps until his shadow fell across the desk. "I see you found the books," he said, his tone unreadable. Valerie stood quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have presumed." Lucas held up a hand, stopping her apology. "No need, I asked you here partly for this." He peered over her shoulder at the open ledger. "You found mistakes, small ones," she said hesitantly. "The figures themselves are correct, but some of the calculations." She trailed off, not wanting to criticize his work. To her surprise, Lucas laughed. "I told you my eyes weren't what they used to be." He sat in the chair next to the desk. "My father taught me cattle, not accounting. I manage, but it's not my strong suit." "My father was a banker in Charleston," Valerie offered. "He insisted I learn bookkeeping, said every woman should know how money works, even if society pretends we don't need to." "Sounds like a wise man," Lucas said. "Where is he now?" "Gone. Yellow fever took both my parents in '74. The old pain surfaced briefly. "I was 16. My aunt brought me to Arizona to live with her, but she passed 3 years later. That's when I married Edward. He was a business associate of my uncle's." Lucas's expression darkened. "And how old was Edward when you married him at 19? Valerie looked away. 49. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken judgment, not of her, Valerie realized, but of the circumstances that had led a young woman to such a marriage. "Were you happy with him?" Lucas finally asked, his voice gentle. "He was kind enough," Valerie replied carefully. "He never mistreated me, but no, I wasn't happy. I was comfortable, secure. I thought that was enough." She met Lucas's gaze directly. "I was wrong." Lucas nodded slowly. "Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. The work is real, these books are a mess, and Sarah truly would appreciate help around the house. She's been trying to run the place and teach at the schoolhouse in town. It's too much for one person." "Your sister is a teacher." "She is. Studied back east, came out here 5 years ago when our father died and left us the ranch. She's a better hand with cattle than most of my men, but her heart's in the classroom." Valerie smiled, warming to the image of this capable woman. "I look forward to meeting her." "She'll be back tomorrow or the next day," Lucas said, rising from his chair. "In the meantime, why don't you come see the rest of the place, unless you'd rather keep working on those ledgers?" Valerie glanced at the books, tempted to continue the familiar, comfortable task. Then she looked up at Lucas's expectant face and made a different choice. "I'd like to see the ranch." The tour took most of the afternoon. Lucas showed her the barn where they kept the horses and the corrals where young stock was trained. He introduced her to the few ranch hands who worked the double C. Ellis, the foreman she'd met the day before, Miguel, a skilled horseman from Sonora, and brothers Jacob and William, who handled most of the heavy labor. They walked to the edge of a pasture where cattle grazed in the distance, the mountains providing a stunning backdrop. Lucas pointed out landmarks and boundaries, speaking with obvious pride about the land his father had settled 20 years earlier. "It was nothing but scrub when he first came," Lucas explained. "Everyone said he was a fool to think cattle could thrive here. Took him 5 years to prove them wrong, another 10 to make it profitable." "And now it's yours," Valerie observed. "Mine and Sarah's," he corrected. "We're partners in everything here." The sun was beginning to set as they made their way back to the house, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Valerie paused to watch the spectacle, suddenly overcome by the beauty of this harsh land. "I never took the time to look at sunsets when I lived in town," she confessed. "Everything was always so contained." Lucas stood beside her, his face softened by the golden light. "That's why I could never live in a city. Out here, there's nothing between you and the sky." Valerie glanced at him, seeing not just the weathered rancher but the man beneath, thoughtful, observant, with an appreciation for beauty that surprised her. Something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she quickly suppressed. She was here as an employee, nothing more, and her life had been upended too thoroughly to contemplate any other possibility. That evening, they shared a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread that Lucas had prepared. Valerie learned he was a surprisingly competent cook. "Don't tell the men," he said with a wink as he served her. "They'd never respect me if they knew I could bake a decent biscuit." Valerie laughed her first genuine laugh in longer than she could remember. "Your secret is safe with me." After dinner, Lucas showed her to a bookshelf in the parlor. "Feel free to read anything that catches your fancy. I'm going to check on a mare that's close to foaling. Might be a late night." Left alone, Valerie selected a well-worn copy of the Odyssey and settled into a comfortable chair near the fireplace. The familiar story transported her away from her troubles, and she read until her eyes grew heavy. She must have dozed off because she awakened with a start when the front door opened. Lucas entered, looking tired but pleased. "Healthy colt," he announced. "Mother's doing fine." Valerie smiled, marking her place in the book. "Congratulations. You should get some proper sleep," Lucas said, nodding toward the bedroom. "Tomorrow, I thought you might like to ride out with me to check the herd in the south pasture, if you're interested." The invitation surprised her. "I'd like that very much." Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how comfortable they had become in each other's company after just one day. "Good night, Valerie," Lucas said softly. "Good night, Lucas," she replied, retreating to her room with the strange flutter returning to her chest. The following days fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings, Valerie worked on the ranch accounts, organizing years of haphazard record, keeping into a coherent system. Afternoons, she often rode out with Lucas to various parts of the ranch, learning the operation and enjoying the spectacular scenery. Sarah Calloway returned from Tucson on the fourth day of Valerie's stay, a tall, confident woman with the same piercing blue eyes as her brother and a direct manner that Valerie found refreshing after years of carefully measured social interactions in Florence. "So you're the one who's finally making sense of Lucas's terrible bookkeeping," Sarah said after introductions. "I've been telling him for years he needs help with those ledgers." "Your brother has been very kind to me," Valerie replied. Sarah's expression softened. "Lucas has always had a soft spot for those in need. It's his best quality, though it sometimes leads to strays of all sorts ending up here." She smiled to take any sting from her words. "Though you hardly seem like a stray to me, Valerie, more like someone who's finally found her way home." The comment, casual as it was, struck Valerie deeply. In the short time she'd been at the Double C, she had begun to feel more at ease than she ever had in Edward's grand house in Florence. That evening, Sarah insisted on cooking, saying she needed to reclaim her kitchen before Lucas ruined all her pots. The siblings' good-natured bickering revealed a deep affection that made Valerie ache for the family she'd lost so young. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Sarah asked about Valerie's marriage. "Lucas told me your husband's brother threw you out," she said bluntly. "Thomas Lockhart is known even in Tucson as a greedy snake." "Sarah," Lucas admonished, but Valerie shook her head. "It's all right, it's true." She took a deep breath. "Edward and I had what you might call a marriage of convenience. He needed a hostess for his business dinners, someone presentable on his arm. I needed security after my aunt died. It wasn't." She hesitated. "It wasn't a love match." "Were you very unhappy?" Sarah asked gently. Valerie considered the question carefully. "I was lonely," she finally admitted. "Edward was kind in his way, but distant. We lived separate lives under the same roof. When he died, I mourned him as one might mourn a benevolent employer, not a husband." She looked down at her hands. "Perhaps that makes me cold." "No," Lucas said firmly. "It makes you honest." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Valerie felt that same flutter in her chest, stronger now. She looked away first, unsettled by the intensity of her reaction. "Well," Sarah said, rising from her chair, "I'm exhausted from the journey. Good night, you two." After Sarah had gone inside, Valerie and Lucas sat in companionable silence, the night sounds of the desert surrounding them. "Thank you," Valerie said after a while. "For what?" "For not judging me." "For my marriage, for how I feel about Edward's death. Most people would think me heartless." Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Valerie, you did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that." "And now," she asked softly, "what am I doing now?" "Now," he said, his voice equally quiet, "I think you might be learning to live." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lucas stood abruptly. "I should turn in too. Early start tomorrow." Valerie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she watched him walk into the house, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Lucas Calloway. The realization terrified her. Her marriage to Edward had been calculated and cold, but safe in its emotional distance. What she felt for Lucas was dangerous, a wild, unpredictable thing that threatened the careful control she'd maintained over her life for years. That night, Valerie lay awake long after the household had gone quiet, wrestling with feelings she'd never expected to experience. The following weeks brought a deepening friendship between Valerie and the Calloway siblings. Sarah, discovering Valerie's education and facility with numbers, invited her to help at the schoolhouse one day a week. Valerie found unexpected joy in working with the children, many of whom came from ranches and farms scattered across the territory. Her relationship with Lucas evolved too, shifting subtly from employer and employee to something more complex. They often worked side by side, Valerie maintaining the account books while Lucas handled correspondence with cattle buyers. Their conversations ranged from practical ranch matters to literature, politics, and personal philosophies. Valerie learned that Lucas had fought briefly in the closing days of the Civil War, though he spoke little of that time. He had traveled extensively before settling permanently at the Double C after his father's death, and his bookshelves reflected a curious and educated mind. In turn, Valerie shared stories of her childhood in Charleston, her love of music, though the ranch lacked a piano, and her quiet passion for astronomy, which Lucas enthusiastically encouraged by teaching her the constellations visible from the ranch. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after Valerie's arrival, Lucas asked her to accompany him to check on a remote water source in the foothills. The ride took longer than expected, and they found themselves returning as the sun was setting. Lucas suggested they stop at a high point overlooking the ranch to watch the sunset. As they dismounted and stood side by side, Valerie was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of leather and sage that always seemed to accompany him, the solid warmth of his body next to hers. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Lucas said, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was sinking in a blaze of glory. Valerie's heart quickened. "Yes, the harvest dance is next Saturday in town. I was wondering if you'd like to attend with me." He turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Not as my employee, but as my guest." Valerie caught her breath. The harvest dance was a significant social event in the area, and Lucas's invitation clearly signaled a shift in their relationship. "I'd be honored," she said softly. "But Lucas, people will talk. I'm a widow of less than 3 months." "Let them talk," he replied, taking a step closer. "Valerie, I've grown to care for you deeply. I hope you might feel something for me as well." The moment of truth had arrived, and Valerie found she could no longer hide from her feelings. "I do," she whispered, "but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of depending on someone again. Of losing myself. With Edward, I became what he wanted: quiet, decorative, undemanding. I don't want to disappear like that again." Lucas reached out slowly and took her hand. "I would never ask you to be anything but exactly who you are, the woman who argues with me about cattle prices, who teaches Miguel's daughter to read on Fridays, who stays up half the night tracking comets." His voice grew husky. "The woman I've fallen in love with." Valerie's eyes filled with tears. "Lucas, whatever she might have said was interrupted by the distant sound of a rifle shot, followed by the alarming sight of smoke rising from the direction of the ranch house. "Something's wrong," Lucas said, instantly alert. "We need to get back." They mounted quickly and rode hard toward the ranch, fear driving them forward. As they approached, they could see flames engulfing one of the outbuildings, the storage shed where hay and grain were kept. Ranch hands were forming a bucket line from the well to the burning building, while Sarah directed their efforts from the relative safety of the yard. "What happened?" Lucas shouted as they dismounted. "Riders," Sarah answered grimly. 3 of them. They fired at the house, then set the shed ablaze. Ellis recognized one of them. It was Joseph Lockhart, Thomas's son. Valerie felt the blood drain from her face. "This is because of me," she whispered. "They've found me." Lucas's expression hardened. "No, this is because of them. Stay with Sarah." He moved to join the men fighting the fire. For the next 2 hours, Valerie helped where she could, fetching water, tending to minor burns, preparing food for the exhausted men. By the time the fire was contained, the storage shed was a total loss, but thankfully the flames hadn't spread to other buildings. As the ranch hands dispersed to their quarters, Lucas, Sarah, and Valerie gathered in the kitchen to assess the situation. "This wasn't random," Lucas said, his face grim in the lamplight. They targeted us specifically. But why would Thomas Lockhart care enough to send his son after me? Valerie asked. He got everything he wanted: Edward's house, business, money. Maybe not everything, Sarah suggested. Ellis said the riders were asking about papers. They thought you might have taken something when you left. Valerie frowned, trying to remember what she'd grabbed in those frantic moments before being forced from the house. I took some clothing, my mother's locket, a few personal items. Nothing of value. Then a memory surfaced. Wait, Edward kept a journal. He was always writing in it, especially toward the end. I took it because it was on the bedside table. I thought it might contain his last thoughts, something personal to remember him by. Have you read it? Lucas asked. Valerie shook her head. It seemed too private somehow. It's still in my bundle, untouched. We should look at it, Sarah said firmly. If Thomas is willing to burn down our property over it, it must contain something important. Valerie retrieved the journal from her room, a leather-bound book with Edward's initials embossed on the cover. She handed it to Lucas, still reluctant to violate her late husband's privacy. Lucas opened it carefully, thumbing through pages of neat handwriting. Most of this looks like business notes, daily observations. He paused, his expression changing. Wait. Listen to this. Confirmed today what I've long suspected. Thomas has been systematically embezzling from the company for years. The missing funds total over $30,000. I've documented everything in the enclosed papers and will confront him when he returns from Phoenix. Edward died 3 days after Thomas returned from that trip, Valerie said slowly, the implications dawning on her. The doctor said it was his heart, but are there papers with the journal? Sarah asked. Valerie shook her head. No, nothing like that. He must have hidden them somewhere else, Lucas said. Somewhere in the house, probably. Which means Thomas has been searching for them since Edward's death, Sarah concluded. And now he thinks you have them, Valerie. Lucas closed the journal. This changes everything. If Thomas Lockhart killed his brother and stole from their company, he won't stop until he's sure those papers are destroyed. You're not safe here anymore. Fear washed over Valerie. Where could I go? He'd find me anywhere in the territory. Not if he's in jail, Lucas said grimly. We need to take this journal to the sheriff in Florence. With this as evidence, they can investigate Edward's death and the missing money. And if the sheriff is in Thomas's pocket? Sarah asked, voicing the concern Valerie was too afraid to articulate. Then we go to the federal marshal in Tucson, Lucas replied. Either way, we need to act quickly. They'll be back, and next time they might do worse than burn a storage shed. That night, despite the danger, Valerie slept more peacefully than she expected, knowing that Lucas was keeping watch from the porch. Something had shifted between them in those moments before the fire, a declaration made that, while interrupted, had changed everything. At dawn, Lucas outlined his plan. He and Valerie would ride to Florence to speak with the sheriff, while Sarah and the ranch hands maintained an armed watch over the property. I'm coming with you, Valerie insisted when Lucas suggested she might be safer remaining at the ranch. Edward was my husband. If Thomas killed him, I want to see justice done. The journey to Florence took most of the day. They rode alert and watchful, taking indirect routes and keeping to cover when possible. Lucas carried a rifle across his saddle, and Valerie realized with a start that he was prepared to use it if necessary. Florence looked exactly as it had when Valerie had fled 2 months earlier, yet she felt like a different woman returning. The small town with its mix of adobe and wooden buildings had once represented confinement to her. Now it represented a past she needed to confront before she could truly move forward. Sheriff Miller's office was on the main street, a simple building with a small jail attached. The man himself was younger than Valerie expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a serious demeanor and intelligent eyes. Mrs. Lockhart, he said, recognizing her immediately. There's been some concern about your sudden departure after your husband's death. I was forced to leave, Valerie replied firmly. By Thomas Lockhart, my brother-in-law. Lucas placed the journal on the sheriff's desk. We believe Thomas Lockhart may have been involved in his brother's death. This journal contains evidence that Edward discovered Thomas was embezzling from their company. Sheriff Miller's expression remained neutral as he examined the journal. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Calloway. They're more than accusations," Lucas said. "Thomas's son Joseph led an attack on my ranch yesterday. They burned a building and fired shots at my home, endangering my sister and my workers." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That I can investigate immediately. As for the other matters," he closed the journal. "I'll need to speak with the doctor who attended Mr. Lockhart before his death and examine the company's financial records." "Thomas won't allow that," Valerie said. "He won't have a choice, madam, not if I have a judge's order." Sheriff Miller stood. "I suggest you both stay out of sight while I begin my investigation. Thomas Lockhart has influence in this town, but he's not above the law." They took rooms at a small hotel on the outskirts of Florence under assumed names. As evening fell, Valerie paced the floor of her room, anxiety making rest impossible. A soft knock at the connecting door startled her. "Valerie, it's Lucas." She opened the door to find him looking as restless as she felt. "I can't sleep either," she admitted. "Walk with me," he suggested. "The hotel has a small garden in the back. We should be safe enough there." The garden was little more than a patch of ground with a few desert plants and a bench, but the night was clear, the stars brilliant above them. They sat side by side, the events of the past 2 days creating both distance and intimacy between them. "I never thanked you," Valerie said after a long silence. "For what? For believing me, for helping me when no one else would." She turned to face him. "For saying I would have everything I need." Lucas took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the cool night air. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever happens tomorrow, Valerie, I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed. I love you. Not because you needed saving, but because of who you are: strong, intelligent, resilient." Valerie's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and liberating. "I think I have almost from the beginning, though I tried not to." Lucas smiled, the moonlight catching the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Sarah says I'm too impulsive, that I leap before I look. And what do you say?" "I say when something's right, you know it." He leaned forward, his intention clear in his eyes. "May I kiss you, Valerie?" In answer, she closed the distance between them. His lips were gentle on hers, the kiss tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, Valerie felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, a final letting go of the past, an embracing of the future. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "we face it together." The following morning brought a flurry of activity. Sheriff Miller arrived at the hotel early, his expression serious but satisfied. "I've arrested Thomas Lockhart for embezzlement," he announced without preamble. "His son Joseph is in custody for the attack on your ranch. And I've opened an investigation into Edward Lockhart's death. The doctor who attended him has some interesting observations about symptoms that might indicate poisoning rather than heart failure." Valerie sat down heavily, the confirmation of her suspicions overwhelming. "He really killed him." "We don't know that for certain yet," the sheriff cautioned, "but there's enough evidence to warrant an exhumation and full examination. In the meantime, Mrs. Lockhart, you should know that under Arizona territory law, if Thomas is convicted of stealing from the company, his claim to his brother's estate would be invalidated. As Edward's widow, you would be the legal heir." The news was stunning. "I could have the house back, the business." "Potentially, yes, though these matters can take time to resolve in court." After the sheriff left, Valerie and Lucas sat in silence, processing the implications. "You could return to your life in Florence," Lucas said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Reclaim what was taken from you." Valerie studied his face, seeing the fear behind his composed expression, fear that she would choose her former life of comfort over the uncertain future they had just begun to imagine together. "The house in Florence was never my home," she said firmly. "It was a place I lived, nothing more." She took his hands in hers. "The Double C, with you and Sarah, that's become my home. If Edward's estate is restored to me, I'll sell the business. The money would be useful. We could expand the ranch, improve the water systems like you've talked about." The tension left Lucas's face, replaced by a smile that lit his eyes. "We. Yes, we, if you'll have me. Valerie Lockhart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I would be honored to have you as my partner in all things." They returned to the Double C Ranch 3 days later, riding side by side as equals, as partners, as two people who had found in each other not just love but a shared vision for the future. Sarah met them at the gate, her face breaking into a wide smile at their news both of Thomas's arrest and of their engagement. "It's about time," she declared, hugging them both. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the barn to make you admit your feelings." Life settled into a new rhythm. The legal proceedings against Thomas Lockhart progressed slowly but steadily. Evidence of Edward's poisoning was eventually confirmed, adding murder to the charges against his brother. Joseph Lockhart received a 5-year sentence for his role in the ranch attack. By the following spring, the courts had awarded Edward's estate to Valerie. True to her word, she sold the business and house in Florence, using part of the money to improve the Double C and setting aside the rest for their future. Lucas and Valerie married on a perfect May morning in 1884, with Sarah as maid of honor and the entire ranch in attendance. The ceremony, held under the great oak tree near the house, was simple but deeply meaningful. "You once told me I would have everything I need," Valerie said in her vows, her voice carrying across the assembled guests. "What I've found with you is everything I never dared to want: love, partnership, purpose, and a true home." Lucas's voice was steady but full of emotion as he replied, "When I found you on that road, I thought I was saving you. I didn't realize you would save me too from loneliness, from a life half-lived. You are my heart, Valerie, and I will spend every day making sure you never doubt your worth or your place in this world." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Valerie felt the final pieces of her heart healing. The journey from that desperate day on the road outside Florence to this moment had been unpredictable and sometimes frightening, but it had led her to where she truly belonged. In the years that followed, the Double C Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Sarah eventually married the new schoolmaster and built a house of her own nearby, remaining an integral part of the ranch operations and their family life. Valerie and Lucas welcomed their first child, a son they named James, a year after their wedding, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. The house that had once seemed so modest to Valerie's eyes became the heart of a loving family and a successful enterprise. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas presented Valerie with a gift: a telescope, ordered from back east, set up on a special platform he had built on a hill overlooking the ranch. "For my stargazer," he said, watching her delight with satisfaction. "So you can always see the vastness of possibilities." That night, after the children were asleep, they stood together under the Arizona sky, the telescope forgotten, as they simply held each other. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that she had no regrets. "Completely," Valerie answered truthfully, leaning into his embrace. "I have everything I need and so much more." Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road and grown into a life richer and more fulfilling than either of them had dared to imagine.